Kia ora, I'm Tim McCready and this is Too Much Talk, a podcast from Onehunga FM. Way back in 1893, Elizabeth Yates became Mayor of Onehunga and the first female mayor in the British Empire. She famously said,
"There is in both borough councils and in Parliament too a great deal too much talk."
In Season 2 of Too Much Talk, we'll be speaking to those candidates vying to be the MP for Maungakiekie, as well as some local friends and commentators. This election is set to be one of the closest ever, and who you choose to represent us locally can have a big impact on what happens to our part of Aotearoa New Zealand. So listen in and make your vote count. On today's episode of Too Much Talk, I chat with Margo Onishchenko, who is ex-candidate for Maungakiekie. We talk about some of the observations she had on the differences between New Zealand and Russia, and what motivates someone living in New Zealand for the past decade to decide to get involved in politics. Kia ora, Margo, welcome along to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us.
Good evening, Tim. It's lovely meeting you.
I have had a bit of a read of your biography, and you've got a really fascinating background, but I thought instead of me telling all of our listeners about you, I'd rather give you the chance. So what I want you to do is imagine you're out door knocking, you're campaigning to be the MP for Maungakiekie, and I open the door. What would you tell me about yourself?
Well, I would say that I'm an ACT candidate for Maungakiekie electorate, that my name is Margo Onishchenko, that I came from Russia 10 years ago and, have been in New Zealand ever since. That I really love Maungakiekie electorate. I spent some time living there until I got priced out. But I still really love the area. And but then you see, I got into this door knocking, mode instead of telling the biography. So I guess it got a little bit murky. So. But those are the basics. So I'm, originally, from Russia, an immigrant, studied at Unitec, then went to the University of Auckland and became a structural engineer. I've been very fortunate with the company that I'm with. I've been working for them for 9 years. It was my very first job application and my one and only job interview. And seems to be settled ever since. And I've joined ACT Party maybe a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a very gradual increase in the involvement with the party. And then I started being more heavily invested, especially as I see what's happening to my beloved country, which is my now home country. And I thought that it's time for some real change and time to fulfill the civic duty.
Yeah, great. Okay, so you were born in Russia, you grew up in Russia. What was it that made you come to New Zealand?
So originally it was my sister who called our mom one day and she said "Hey mom, don't worry, I'm getting married and moving to New Zealand." And that was a little bit of a shock to everyone. And that completely turned our life upside down. I was a teenager and I kept on receiving parcels from my sister and mainly contained chocolate. And there was no deep thinking behind my move per se, because I was completely bought, with chocolate and just, I want to live in a country that has such a supply of chocolate.
Yeah, okay. Oh, fantastic.
Kind of a childish reason, but essentially I was 18. Yeah. So I turned 18 and I graduated from school 3 weeks later. And 2 days after that, I left the country. I packed my bags and just left the country.
I've actually spent quite a bit of time in Russia, or a little bit of time in Russia. But for those listening, how would you describe, if you think about where you grew up, what's the sort of main differences that you see between, growing up in Russia and then coming and living in New Zealand? When you arrived in New Zealand, what were the things that stood out to you as being most different?
I would say there are two things that are very different, and they are both to do with people. So the very big difference is that people in Russia do not really have a sense of agency. And there is a sentiment that, the government should do this, my backyard has a lot of litter. That's because the government is not, hiring enough street sweepers to clean my backyard. Or, this is bad. This is because of the government. Government ought to do this. Government ought to do this. Government ought to do this. Zero agency on every single level of life. And that is a part of the reason with all of the horrors that are happening now, political-wise, societal-wise, etc., on every single level. And the second biggest difference is there's kind of a bit of an opposite with New Zealand. In Russia, people are generally very well educated, very capable, very, they have a lot of personal strength and fortitude. But the society is so closed down and so anti-egalitarian that there is no way for you to actually get along in life. Whereas in New Zealand, people are given every single opportunity to do well in life. People are essentially shoved with opportunities on every single corner and just begging for some talent. Please come along, please, show up, do this, do that. We really need people. But the state of the educational system, how we are second last on, every single parameter in terms of our schooling, just keeps our, economy, keeps our potential down. And as a country, we are not, going as forward as quickly as we could. I think it's a huge waste of potential human resource.
I'm interested that you've joined the ACT Party, and I'm just curious to know. So you arrived. Is it 10 years?
10 years.
Been in New Zealand?
Yeah, to be exact, it's been 10 years and 2 months.
10 years and 2 months. Oh, well, happy anniversary. But what is it specifically that made you most interested in joining the ACT Party when you looked at all the political parties in New Zealand?
It was a very gradual process. I started being more involved in the political matters because I started noticing the very big shifts away from what makes a prosperous, democratic, liberal society, a country that people want to live on. And I started having those shifts away from it, which were very, much against the liberal democratic values. And no one seemed to be talking about it except for the ACT Party. And it just seemed like that was the only party that had the courage, the strength and, the set of values and a very strong commitment to those basic principles of a liberal society that was willing to stand up for those values. And I felt very much compelled to join such a party because I feel very strongly about living in a free and prosperous society.
And how's the campaign going? For those listening that, it's a lot of work, right? And you're working full time. So how are you finding that experience?
I find that it is a lot of work and also quite a bit of fun. I did not expect to enjoy it, to be honest, that much, because I knew how much work it is and how easy it is to say something stupid that would actually harm the very cause that you are working for. But on the other hand, I've felt incredible support from the community, engaging conversations, sometimes a little bit of heartbreaking conversations because people tell me the stories about their crime and, being victims of crime or the cost of living crisis. But feeling a part of a movement that is trying to bring the real change to the country to the better is very rewarding.
And when you're out talking to people in Maungakiekie, what are the big issues? I guess you've just touched on crime and the cost of living. Would you say those are the biggest issues that people are talking to you about?
Absolutely. So what I have introduced as a part of our now ACT Party routine is going to the night markets. And because most of the people who come to the public meetings are people who have spare time and resources to actually allocate energy and, time to show up. So, but if you want to talk to ordinary people who are just getting, on a daily basis and don't really care about much about politics, you need to come to them. So we go to the night markets and we have huge issues board where people can put their stickers of what is important to them. And time again and again, the cost of living is an absolute winner, especially around the southeast parts of Maungakiekie electorate. Towards Ellerslie, it's more focused about crime, and a lot of business owners talk about the crime, especially if you go from business to business. They either have those around how do you call those billards? So the concrete pillars that stop the cars from raiding.
Bollards.
Bollards. Yeah, and then business owners serving customers from behind metal bars in Ellerslie. That is rather shocking to see. So absolutely. So first of all, cost of living. Second of all, crime, and then people talk a variety of things. It was very touching to hear people independently of each other say that education is the most important issue, because if you have good education, you will solve the rest. Then people talk about health and housing. So very, kind of basic level topics, but very close to people's hearts, and they feel very strongly about it.
My next question for you is to ask what policies in particular, or to name it, to talk through a couple of ACT policies. But before I get to that, you mentioned the night markets. So I'm curious, it's been a while since I've been to the night markets. When you're there, do you have anything in particular that your sort of favorite spots to eat or favorite foods to get from the night market?
Well, I'm a big fan of Asian foods, and it's very lucky that there is a big supply of those. And there is a variety of night markets around Auckland, and I'm not sure which one of them has it, but there was like a Greek stall that would serve honeyed apples, like honeyed roasted apples, and that was fantastic.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that sounds good. I'll look out for it. Okay, so to my original question, you've mentioned sort of cost of living, crime, education, health, housing. We don't have all the time in the world, but if you could pick maybe one or two of ACT's policies that you're most passionate about, that you think will make a real shift in some of those areas, what would you point to?
Well, I'll talk what people talk about all of the time, which is cost of living. And I know that every single party, now even Labour, has caught up on the wind that there is a cost of living crisis. But I think ACT has the most comprehensive policy that is actually going to solve the problem. Because we are actually serious on the policies and the ways to solve it. So there are like two sides of the equation. Imagine you are a family that is suddenly, tight on, money, and they can't afford their goods. So what they do, they cut on their spending and they try to look, for more money, like source of income. They don't, go into debt, and just keep on having a party at the expense of borrowing and letting their children pay off their debts. So as an ACT party, we have a policy that tackles the issue of the, cutting the budget, which is, bringing the spending down to probably 2017 levels. Labour is spending additional $80 billion a year, because previously it was thought to be 60, but today's figures revealed it was closer to, I think it was closer to 80. So we're certainly going to cut down on the spending, because if you borrow money, if you spend more than you can afford, that fuels the, inflation. If it fuels the inflation, it fuels all of the prices go up. So we're going to cut down on that dramatically without cutting the core services. That's number one. Number two, we are going to cut down the prices by bringing down the inflation. And number three, we are actually going to let people keep more money in their pocket by cutting the tax brackets dramatically. And it's not just the high tax brackets, as what media likes to say. It's across the board for everyone. Absolutely every single family will get a tax cut. If you are on average income and have a child, it's equivalent to $2,300 a year. I would say that's a good solution to fight the cost of living crisis. Maybe if I touch on the housing side of the things, because a big part of the cost of living crisis is the cost of rents. People tell me how much they pay for their rent, and that's absolutely horrendous. So if we slash that interest deductibility, bill that Labour has introduced, the tax on the landlords, which is being passed to the tenants, that would allow the rents to come down. We are sharing GST with the developers to build the residential properties, so that would actually increase the supply of the housing. And also, if we stop borrowing money and actually, get our economy to the good bookkeeping, that will reduce the interest rates on the mortgages as well. So that is a very comprehensive package that calls for some real measures and really serious measures that are going to help.
Okay, well, I'll stop you there. I mean, we could talk about X policy all night long, but we'll stop there. That's great. So in Maungakiekie, it's a bit of a sort of a bellwether seat. It kind of shifts back and forth between Labour and National, the person that's holding that particular seat. But what is it that you would say you offer that sets you apart from the other candidates that are running for Maungakiekie?
Oh, that's a tricky question. Talking about shifting seat, it's because the Maungakiekie electorate is a very interesting one. If you look at the maps, the demographic maps, you can see a very clear line between a very, essentially well-off parts of Maungakiekie and then some really struggling ones. So that explains the very shifting balance. In terms of what makes me stand out is that I'm quite committed to actually listen to people, and I do pass on the things that I hear from people back to the party, people who are in parliament, so that they know what's happening on the ground. And given that the electorate vote is first past the post, it is the fight between the Labour and the National. I have heard incredible things about Greg. Like everyone I talk to, they think Greg is a great guy for National, and he actually helped us with the hoardings, which was very nice of him. So we are not as much set for the electorate vote as for the party vote, because the more party vote we get, the more actual hope we have for the electorate in the future. So currently, we are just too small to fight for electorates for serious. It's the matter between two big parties, because first past the post. Yeah. So
it's about getting the message out for ACT primarily.
It is a two-way conversation. We can't get the message out if we don't listen to people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. What would you say is your vision for Maungakiekie? What would you like to see? Let's fast forward another 10 years into the future. What would you like to see Maungakiekie become?
Well, if you look again at the demographics of Maungakiekie, an average Maungakiekie resident has, tertiary education. They work more than 40 hours a week. They are in paid employment rather than, a business owner. And they do have kids, but probably teenage-aged kids. So probably what I see going in the future is that for people who work more than 40 hours a week, and the average number is more than 40, for them to be able to keep more of their hard-earned income in their pocket, because chances are they work so hard because A, they're driven, and B, they, the government takes too much from them. So if only they were taxed a little bit less, then they will not be penalized into the higher tax bracket because they take up on more hours. So I'll just say that, the hard work of a Maungakiekie resident should be rewarded.
And just you mentioned it right at the top of the episode, but you used to live in Maungakiekie, you've moved out. What would you say connects you to the suburb now? What's your main connection into, or sorry, not suburb, the electorate?
Well, the hands down, it will be One Tree Hill. So that is probably, my favorite place in the entire Auckland. I still go there pretty regularly, and just the twin oak, road, the driveway. That's my favorite part. That's my favorite part of the park. And when I used to live in Greenland, that was the walking distance away from the park. So I would grab avocados and nachos, and I'll just go to the top of One Tree Hill, and I eat my guacamole with some nachos there, and probably one of the best memories I have.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. Well, the final part of this conversation is a bit of a quick fire round. So I've just got a few questions that are sort of, some of them are related to politics, some of them aren't, just to give people a chance to get to know you a little bit better. So the first question that I want to ask you is, who is a political figure or person from another party that you look up to?
From another party, that would be Nicola Willis. If we're talking from another party, then it will be her. Mm-hmm. I think she's very much on point. Yeah, she talks sense, and she has good policies.
Great. Okay. If you had to recommend a TV series to a friend, let's just say you've got a friend that's, at home sick for a week, and they're like, what's a TV series I can watch to pass the time? What would you be recommending to them?
Can I just pretend that they haven't watched the Game of Thrones and just recommend it all over again? But excluding season 6, 7, and 8.
So you'd recommend that one?
Yes, but
I've not seen it.
Yeah, pretend season 6, 7, and 8 do not exist.
Oh, right. Got it. Okay. So just watch seasons 1 through to 5.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. For the next question, I want you to imagine you're in a supermarket. You're in the aisle with all the chocolate that your sister was sending you when you were back in Russia. And you've got the chocolate there, and you've got the other confectionery as well. What's the one thing you'd be grabbing to put into your trolley?
Well, chocolate, of course. That's one and only thing.
You got to be more specific.
I'm not sure the branding will be grateful for an endorsement from ACT Party. So I'm trying to avoid it because
what flavor of chocolate would you go for? Is it just milk, or you go for something?
No, it's dark chocolate, because as a very heavily invested chocolate person, it needs to be 50 or 62% dark chocolate, and no flavor either. Part of the reason, because I'm a purist, the chocolate needs to be of that highest quality. And part of the reason is when there was almond and honey flavored chocolate, I ate so much of it that now I'm banned from buying it, because I'm at risk of getting type 2 diabetes. So.
All right. Okay. We don't have to mention the brands, but I think the listeners can make up their own mind on what brand you're talking about.
There's only one. Sorry. I just completely go away from the ACT issue. And so there's only one brand of chocolate that is the best chocolate in the world, and it happens to be in New Zealand. So.
Yeah, okay. We'll take that. What would you say is the most unexpected or interesting skill or hobby that you have outside of politics?
Well, rock climbing is actually a fairly common hobby to have here. But actually, I haven't mentioned I do stained glasses. So that's part of my hobby.
Oh, wow.
I actually do stained glasses.
Do you do rock climbing indoors or outdoors or both?
In New Zealand, I've only done indoors. In Russia, it was both. And I'm going to go outdoors probably after the election.
Great. Yeah, when you have a bit more free time. If someone is listening to this and it's someone early on in their career and they're looking at you and they want to follow in your footsteps, they like the look of your career that you've had so far, what is one piece of advice that you would give them?
I would tell them to study mathematics as hard as possible, as early as possible, because if they ever decide to become structural engineer, there are 3 mathematical papers and they're very painful ones.
Great. Well, good advice for that particular person that wants to do that. Okay. And finally, what is your favorite thing about the suburb of Onehunga, and why do you love it? And you can't say One Tree Hill, Because that's sort of, I don't classify that as Onehunga.
Okay, so there is a great shopping mall in Onehunga called Onehunga Shopping Mall, I guess, and they have some incredible foods there, and particularly there is a sushi shop that is very, very good there. Probably the best price versus quality ratio, and fantastic small business owners, and I hope they'll get a bit of an easier life after this election.
Bringing it back to politics. Love it. Okay. And the final question, and this does bring it right back to politics. Why should people listening to this podcast vote for you? People
should certainly give the Party Vote Act, because we are the real engine and the driver behind the real change that this country needs very much so. National policies do not take the issues of the cost of living seriously enough. And the ACT policies are the ones that are actually going to make a real difference. And not just the cost of living, but also the crime, because a lot of people have been victimized quite brutally. I hear stories about people, burglared and stuff. So, and ACT is very serious on those two topics. And I would say consider Party Vote Act.
Great. Well, Margo, thanks so much for taking the time to chat for us. I know, as I said, you are working full time and campaigning takes a lot of your spare time. So we do really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us. And I've really enjoyed getting to hear a little bit more about what it is that makes someone that's been here for 10 years run in politics. So thank you so much for spending the time.
Lovely talking to you, Tim.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Too Much Talk. We are making these podcasts to help people be as informed as they can be ahead of the election. The success of this podcast relies on people like you helping us reach a wider audience. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please spread the word about us with your friends and neighbours, or give us a review in your favourite podcast app. I'll be speaking with all of Maungakieke's local candidates in the lead up to this year's election, so stay tuned for more conversations. Connect with me on social media if you'd like to get in touch or share your thoughts. I'm Tim_McCready on Twitter, Instagram, Threads. And finally, a massive thanks to my producer Josh Couch, the creative genius behind Onehunga FM and the person who made this podcast a reality. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to make your vote count on October 14.